All right, ever wished you could, like, just describe something and bam, a picture appears?
Like magic.
Yeah, but like a really good picture, right? Not just some scribbles. I'm talking high resolution, all the details you'd imagine. That's what we're diving into today, exploring a system called unCLIP.
It's pretty amazing. Takes text and makes images from it.
We're going to break down how it works, what it's good at, maybe even uncover some quirks along the way, all thanks to the research you shared.
Well, it builds on two really powerful AI concepts, kind of revolutionizing how we think about images and text, this whole thing.
Okay, got to unpack that a bit for me. You got me curious now.
So first one is CLIP. It's like a bridge, between images and text. Understands both in a shared space, like a universal translator for visuals and written stuff.
So it can see a picture, like a cat, and connect it to the word cat.
Exactly. But way beyond that, even, grasps complex relationships, concepts. A cat sitting on a mat, that's different from a cat chasing a mouse,
Pretty impressive.
Yeah.
But where does unCLIP fit in all this?
That's where the second concept comes in. Diffusion models. These are cutting edge for generating those super realistic images, like digital artists painting from scratch.
So if CLIP is the translator, diffusion models are the artists.
You got it. unCLIP brings those two together. Instead of CLIP matching an image TO text, unCLIP reverses it, takes text, and uses those diffusion models to make a brand new image.
So it's like a reverse image search. Instead of typing in Sunset Beach and getting pictures, you type it in, unCLIP makes its own WN Sunset Beach.
Precisely, and that reversal, man, opens up tons of creative possibilities, turning words into, visual reality.
Now that's a game changer. And you mentioned image manipulation, too.
Right, because now we've got both. Encoder, that's CLIP, and a decoder, that's unCLIP. Two-way street allows for some mind-bending image stuff. Imagine you got a photo but want to tweak it, make it, more dreamlike or abstract. unCLIP can guide that using text prompts even.
That's wild. Editing photos with words. So sign me up.
Not quite Photoshop yet. But your sources, they show examples. Figure 3. They took an image, encoded it with CLIP, then decoded it back into variations using unCLIP.
Okay, what's so special about the variations, though? Just like different filters or what?
More than filters. They retain some core elements, but change others, like remixing reality based on what CLIP thinks is important in that image.
So by looking at those, we get a glimpse of how CLIP sees the world, right?
Exactly. And what's fascinating, CLIP's understanding might not always be the same as ours. It could focus on details we wouldn't even notice.
Makes sense, like how a dog might focus on smells we humans are totally oblivious to, perceiving differently. But how does unCLIP actually get from the text to the image? There's got to be more to it than just reversing CLIP, right?
You're right. Crucial piece is the prior. Bridges the gap between text you put in and what CLIP understands as an image. Adds context, meaning you could say.
Okay, intrigued. Walk me through this prior thing.
Imagine you're describing cat wearing a hat. The prior takes that text, generates potential image representations or embeddings for CLIP to work with, like giving CLIP a starting point, a rough sketch based on your words.
So the prior's like a brainstorming session for CLIP, coming up with image ideas based on the text.
Kind of like that. Not just copying, but trying to get the meaning, create those visual interpretations.
That's where the magic happens, I bet.
Absolutely. Your sources highlight two types of priors, by the way. Autoregressive and diffusion, they explored.
Two flavors of prior. Do they work the same way at all?
Different approaches, but both aiming to give CLIP those meaningful image embeddings, from the text.
And I'm guessing these priors make a big difference in the final image, huh?
They do. Figure 8 in your sources. Images with and without the prior. Ones with it are significantly better, more realistic A&D, capturing what the text meant.
So the prior gives unCLIP that boost of creativity, helps generate images that really reflect what you typed in.
Precisely, like a talented artist. Not just following instructions, but brings their own artistic flair to the table, so to speak.
Speaking of talented artists, other text-to-image systems out there, right? How does unCLIP stack up?
Well, one that comes up a lot is GLID. Both pushing boundaries, for sure, but some key differences.
All right, I'm all ears. Give me the lowdown. unCLIP versus GLIDE. Who wins?
Interesting thing is, GLID might be a bit better at those photorealistic images, but unCLIP seems to make a wider variety of images from what they found.
So the classic trade-off. Can't have perfect realism, ain't they unlimited creativity, huh?
Seems that way, for now anyway. But unCLIP, it's striking a better balance than what we've seen before. That's exciting.
Makes sense. And honestly, I'm way more interested in the creative side than just replicating reality perfectly.
Yeah.
Got cameras for that, right?
I see your point. Speaking of creative boundaries, there's another comparison, figure 9 in your sources.
Hit me with it. Figure 9, what's that showing us?
They tested how increasing the guidance scale affects both unCLIP and GLADE. Guidance scale basically controls like how closely the AI sticks to the text, you know? Higher guidance, more literal it gets.
So high guidance is follow the recipe exactly. Low guidance is like get creative with the ingredients.
Great analogy. And they found unCLIP keeps more diversity, even at high guidance. Unlike GLAD, which it kind of gets repetitive, less imaginative the higher you go.
That's really interesting. Why do you think unCLIP keeps that spark, even with strict instructions?
Probably because of that two-stage approach. The prior, remember, it sets the stage, its understanding of the text, and the decoder builds on that. So unCLIP gets better image quality without ditching the meaning you gave it at the start.
So it's not just mindlessly making images, it's actually trying to understand, interpret the text, and then be creative with it. But how do we know it's actually good at this, objectively? Any benchmarks, tests to compare it to others?
There are. They put it through MS Kidoko. That's like the gold standard for this text-to-image stuff.
Drumroll. How'd it do?
New state-of-the-art score.
Wow. So it's not just subjectively good, it's objectively awesome. The unCLIP is an overachiever. But even with all this potential, going to be some limitations, right? No system's perfect. We talked about that object attribute thing, but any other areas where it falls short?
Well, got to remember unCLIP success, it's very dependent on the text you give it. Only as good as the information it gets, right? If your text is vague or has errors, the output, well...
Makes sense. Like giving a chef a bad recipe. They might make something edible, but not the masterpiece you hoped for.
Exactly. Quality of the text input, it's key for good results. Not a magic wand, more like a tool that needs to be used skillfully.
Like any creative tool then. The better you get it, its quirks and all, the better you can express yourself with it, you know? But even with those limitations, this is huge for AI and how we create visual stuff. It's like imagining a future where anyone can make cool visuals just by describing them.
It is, and that raises some big questions, right? The role of AI, what even is creativity, the ethics of all this image manipulation.
That's a whole other deep dive waiting to happen. But for now, I think we've covered unCLIP pretty well. Inner workings, strengths, even those limitations.
We've seen how it combines those cutting-edge AI concepts to get some really remarkable results.
And you've able to give us a lot to think about. Creative potential, sure, but also the ethics of it all.
Indeed. But before we go too philosophical, there's one more fascinating thing about unCLIP we haven't touched on.
Oh, now you got me curious again. What else is there to this text-to-image wizardry?
Well, it turns out you can use unCLIP to probe the inner workings of CLIP itself, like revealing how it sees and understands the world, you know?
Okay, now that sounds like we're getting into some serious AI brain surgery. Tell me more about this probing business.
Not brain surgery, but it is a way of peeking inside, seeing how CLIP processes things. Remember, CLIP puts both images and text into that same space, right?
Right, they're common language.
Exactly. So using the decoder, which is unCLIP, you can visualize what CLIP is seeing, create like a visual representation of its understanding.
So it's like mapping CLIP's brain, showing how it connects concepts, features. But why is that important? What can we learn from all this probing?
Helps us get CLIP's strengths and your weaknesses, and it reveals some surprising stuff. Did you know CLIP can be tricked by something called typographic attacks?
Typographic attacks. Sounds like a spy movie. What's that all about?
It's actually pretty simple, but kind of unsettling too. They found that if you, put text on an object, it can fool CLIP into misclassifying it. Figure 6 in your sources, great example. They took an apple, wrote the word iPod on it.
Wait, just writing iPod on an apple makes CLIP think it's an iPod.
Crazy, right? But yeah, CLIP got totally fooled by the text, thought it was an iPod, not an apple.
Hilarious, but also kind of scary if you think about it. But what happened when they put that same CLIP embedding into the decoder, into unCLIP? Did it make an iPod too?
This is where it gets really interesting. Even though CLIP was fooled, unCLIP still generated an apple.
Hold on, so the decoder was smarter than the encoder in this case. How's that even possible?
It suggests that unCLIP, the decoder, is picking up on some visual cues that CLIP might be missing. It's a reminder that these models, powerful as they are, don't always see things exactly like we do.
That's wild. So even though CLIP was tricked by the text, unCLIP could look past that and actually recognize the apple for what it was, almost like it has a deeper understanding of what it's looking at.
One way to think about it, yeah. And this probing thing, it also shows how different aspects of an image are encoded in CLIPs, what they call latent space.
Okay, back up a sec. Latent space, what is that? Sounds pretty technical.
It's basically this multidimensional space, right? Where CLIP represents all the info it gets from images. Like, think of a map where similar images are clustered together and the distances show how they're related.
So it's like a visual map of how CLIP organizes its knowledge of the world. But what does that have to do with this probing thing?
Well, using unCLIP, you can explore different spots on this map, see what kind of images pop up. Figure 7 shows some cool examples. They reconstructed images, but using different numbers of, like, PCA dimensions, which are, like, the coordinates on this map.
And what did they find? Did different coordinates give them different types of images?
Yeah. The lower dimensions, they seem to capture the overall gist, like the basic shapes. But as you add more dimensions, you get more and more specific. It's like starting with a rough sketch and then, filling in all the details.
Got it. So CLIP understands images in this hierarchical way, starting broad and then getting into the specifics. But what does that tell us about how it learns, how it represents knowledge?
It means CLIP learns these abstract concepts first, the overall patterns, and then it builds on that to recognize more specific details. A bit like how we humans learn to recognize objects, right? We start with shapes, then learn what makes a cat different from a dog, even though they both have 4 legs and a tail.
Makes sense. So probing CLP's latent space, it's not just making cool pictures, it's also showing us how CLA thinks, how it understands the visual world. But let's shift gears for a bit. How does unCLIP stack up against the other players in this AI art game? We talked about GLAE, but are there other systems out there trying to do the same thing?
Plenty of approaches out there, yeah. But unCLIP's combo of CLIP and those diffusion models, plus that smart use of the prior, it's setting a new standard. Remember the different priors we talked about, autoregressive and diffusion?
Right, those different flavors that help translate the text into images. Did they find that one type of prior worked better than the other?
Yeah, mostly the diffusion prior won out. Diffusion models are getting super popular in AI these days, so not a surprise they're good at this too.
Makes sense. So it looks like unCLIP is the top dog when it comes to making diverse, high-quality images from text. But have they done any, head-to-head comparisons with other systems, like a true AI art battle royale?
They did. Table 1 in your sources, it shows those human evaluations, unCLIP versus GLIE. Remember, we talked about how unCLIP makes more variety, while GLID might be a tiny bit better at photorealism.
Right, you can't have your cake and eat it too. But what did the people say? Which system did they like better?
Wasn't a knockout for either one.
Yeah.
People gave GLID a slight edge for photorealism, but unCLIP consistently scored higher on diversity and being more creative.
Sounds about right, based on what we've been talking about. If you want picture perfect, maybe GLID is your go-to. But for something unique, imaginative, unCLIP is the winner. Hands down.
Good summary. And remember figure 9 where they cranked up that guidance scale? Showed that unCLIP keeps more diversity even when you give it really specific instructions.
Right, like it's got its own artistic style,
Yeah.
and it's not afraid to show it off, even when you try to box it in. But what about some objective measures? Any way to compare these systems without relying on people's opinions?
That's where those benchmark tests come in. They ran unCLIP through the MS COCO dataset, which, like we said, is the test for this stuff. And guess what? Another state-of-the-art score.
No way, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So it's not just good in theory, it actually delivers. But even with all this success, we got to be real. It's still early days for this tech, and there are bound to be limitations. We talked about the object attribute thing, but any other areas where it stumbles?
One thing to keep in mind is that unCLIP's success is tied to how good the text input is. It can only work with what you give it. If the text is, vague or has mistakes, the output might not be what you're hoping for.
That makes sense. It's like if you give someone directions that are all messed up, they're going to end up lost no matter how good a driver they are.
Exactly. So yeah, good text input, it's crucial for getting good results with unCLIP. It's a powerful tool, but it's not magic.
Like any creative tool, I guess. The better you understand it, the better you can use it. But even with those limitations, unCLIP is a huge leap forward. It's got the potential to change how we make and use visual content, maybe even change how we see the world.
It does, and that brings up all sorts of questions, right? What's AI's role in all this? What does it mean to be creative? And the ethics of making and changing images, that's a big one.
Definitely conversations for another time. But for now, I think we've done a pretty thorough job of explaining unCLIP, how it works, its strengths and weaknesses, and what it all means.
Yeah, I'd say so. We've seen how unCLIP combines those cutting-edge AI concepts and really pushes the limits of what's possible, blurs the lines between words and images, opens up all sorts of creative doors.
Speaking of opening doors, before we wrap up, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier. Probing CLIP's latent space, seeing how it understands the world. You said researchers found that it can be tricked by those typographic attacks. Any other surprising things they've learned about CLIP through this probing process?
Oh, there are. And these unexpected discoveries, that's what makes this whole field so exciting. Well, one of the big ones is that CLIP seems to make its own, internal representations of concepts. And those don't always line up with how WE categorizes stuff as humans.
Okay, gotta unpack that a bit for me. What do you mean CLIP having its own WN representations?
So remember how CLIP embeds those images and text in the same space? Turns out, inside that space, it forms these clusters of related concepts, like all dog pictures together, cat pictures, and so on.
Makes sense, kind of like CLIP making its own visual dictionary, grouping similar things. But you said these clusters, they don't always match human categories. What's that about?
Here's the cool part. Sometimes CLIP groups images based on stuff WE might not think is important. It might put, say, cars and buses together, not just because they're vehicles, but because they both have wheels and D windows.
So CLIP's seeing connections we miss or think are less important. Like it's got its own unique way of understanding what it sees.
Bingo! And that matters for how we use CLIP and systems built on it, like unCLIP. Can't assume CLIP sees the same way we do. Got to be aware of its quirks, you could say.
Really important point, like trying to talk to someone in a different language. Got to watch out for those misunderstandings, right? But this also shows how powerful CLIP is. Learning to see in its own way, that opens up a lot of possibilities.
It does. Even makes you wonder, what does it mean for a machine to understand at all? Is CLIP's cat the same as our cat conceptually, or is it something totally different?
Whoa, now those are some deep thoughts. Worth thinking about as AI gets more and more advanced, that's for sure. But let's zoom out a bit for a sec. We've gotten pretty technical with unCLIP and CLIP. What about the bigger picture? How do you see this tech changing things? The good and the bad. What should people be thinking about?
Well, the good news is, I think unCLIP could make creativity more accessible to everyone. Imagine, anyone with an idea can make amazing visuals, even without artistic skills or fancy software.
Now that's exciting. Like giving everyone that paintbrush and a blank canvas, but instead of paint, they're using words. But there's always that flip side, right? What about the risks?
Yeah, misuse is a big concern. As this tech gets better, easier to use, it also gets easier to make misleading stuff, even harmful content. Think about, generating images so real they could be used for fake news or propaganda.
That's a scary thought. Giving anyone the power to create their own reality, and not everyone's going to use it for good.
Exactly. So we need to be talking about this, the ethics of it all. Need safeguards, guidelines, so it's used responsibly.
Couldn't agree more. Can't just focus on the tech itself. Got to think about the impact, the potential consequences too. Got to be smart about shaping the future so AI helps us, not hurts us, right? But let's not end on a downer. Even with the risks, I'm still pumped about what unCLIP can do creatively. It's a tool to express ourselves in new ways, explore our imaginations, even connect with each other through visuals and stories.
I'm optimistic too. And it's key to remember, technology, it's not good or bad on its own. It's all about how WE choose to use it.
Well said. So as we wrap up our deep dive into unCLIP, I want to leave our listener with something to think about. We've seen words turned into images, the lines getting blurred between language and what we see, explored how it works, the good, the bad. But the biggest question is, what will you do with this power? Create art that inspires, teaches, connects people, explore new ways of seeing things. Or will it be used to mislead, to trick people? The choice is out there now.
The future of this tech, what it means for us, it's still being written. And each of us, we have a part to play in shaping that future.
So go out there, create, explore, try new things.
Yeah.
But do it thoughtfully, responsibly. Because the world's watching. And what we make today, it shapes what tomorrow looks like.